The alarm rang at 6 a.m., exactly as it had every morning for years. Not 5:59. Not 6:01. 6. Always 6. Ethan's hand moved before his mind did. He slapped the alarm, silencing it with the precision of someone who had practiced this motion thousands of times. For a brief moment, he lay still, staring at the ceiling where a thin crack ran from the corner toward the center like a frozen lightning bolt. He had noticed it years ago. It was still there. Nothing ever changed before the alarm. Nothing ever changed after it either. Today, he told himself, would be different. That thought arrived every morning, fresh and confident, like a promise written in invisible ink. He sat up, rubbed his face, and reached for his phone. Notifications flooded the screen, emails, reminders, unfinished plans disguised as productivity. His calendar was full. Meetings, tasks, deadlines. From the outside, his life looked busy, even impressive. Inside, it felt like running on a treadmill that never moved forward. He stood, stretched, and looked at his reflection in the mirror. Same face. Same tired eyes. Same hopeful expression that had learned how to survive without results. "I'll get serious this time," he whispered, brushing his teeth. The words sounded familiar, comforting, useless. Ethan dressed quickly, moved efficiently, and left his apartment right on time. He was good at showing up. He was good at starting things. He was even good at talking about plans. New routines, new goals, new versions of himself that were always just 1 week away. What he wasn't good at was finishing. The days blurred together. Mornings full of intention. Afternoons drowned in distractions. Nights heavy with guilt and rational explanations. He worked hard, or at least it felt that way, yet progress remained invisible. Promotions passed him by. Savings stayed thin. Relationships remained shallow, paused somewhere between potential and disappointment. Still, every night before sleeping, he set the alarm for 6 a.m. Because tomorrow, he believed, motivation would finally stay. As he lay in bed that night, the city humming softly outside his window, Ethan felt that familiar mix of hope and unease. He was moving constantly, but going nowhere. And deep down, far beneath the noise of plans and promises, he sensed an uncomfortable truth forming. It wasn't that life was holding him back. It was that something inside him never stayed long enough to carry him forward. And when the alarm rang again the next morning, unchanged and indifferent, the real story quietly began. January arrived like a clean notebook. The air felt lighter, sharper, as if the year itself was offering Ethan a fresh deal. He woke up before the alarm for the first few days, energized by the strange excitement that only new beginnings bring. The crack in the ceiling didn't bother him anymore. This was a new year. That crack belonged to the old version of him. He bought a notebook with thick pages and a bold title stamped on the cover, "My Best Year Yet." Inside, the handwriting was neat, confident. Wake up early. Exercise 5 days a week. Read every night. Save more. Focus. Become disciplined. The words felt powerful. Writing them gave him a rush, like he had already changed simply by deciding to. He told friends about his plans. He told himself this time was different, and for a while, it really felt that way. He went to the gym. He cooked at home. He worked with intensity, staying late, answering emails quickly, feeling productive. Motivation sat beside him like a loud, enthusiastic companion, clapping every small effort. "See," it whispered. "You're capable." But motivation had a short attention span. By the third week, the excitement softened. The early mornings began to feel heavy. The gym felt farther away. One missed workout turned into 2. One late night turned into a pattern. The notebook stayed on the desk, unopened, its pages still full of perfect intentions that hadn't met reality. Ethan didn't panic. He explained it to himself. "I'm just tired. This week is unusually busy. I'll reset on Monday. Monday came and went. The familiar rhythm returned quietly, without resistance. He still worked. He still planned. He still wanted change. But the fire that had carried him through the first days of the year began to flicker, then shrink. Motivation didn't say goodbye. It simply stopped showing up. Ethan noticed it one evening as he lay in bed, scrolling mindlessly on his phone. The alarm was set, 6 a.m., but the excitement was gone. In its place was something heavier. The slow realization that wanting something badly had never been the problem. He had always wanted more. What he lacked was the ability to continue when the feeling disappeared. And as January quietly slipped into February, Ethan felt a familiar disappointment settle in. Not dramatic, not loud, just quietly persistent. Like a guest who overstayed without ever being invited. Old habits didn't return all at once. They waited patiently. And when motivation left the room, they reclaimed their seats as if they had never been gone. February didn't arrive with excitement. It arrived with silence. The kind of silence that follows disappointment. The space left behind when motivation stops talking. Ethan felt it in the mornings first. The alarm rang at 6 a.m., and this time there was no spark, no surge of optimism. Just a choice. Get up or don't. No cheering voice. No emotional push. For the first time, he noticed how heavy that moment felt. He sat on the edge of the bed, feet on the cold floor, staring at the dim light coming through the window. Every part of him wanted to stay. No one would know. No one would care. The world wouldn't collapse if he slept another hour. And that was the problem. Discipline, he realized, didn't arrive with energy. It arrived empty-handed. He stood up anyway. The day moved slowly. The gym felt dull, almost pointless. There was no satisfaction in lifting weights in a half-empty room. No applause for showing up. At work, he focused without excitement, completing tasks that didn't inspire him, resisting the urge to drift into distraction. It was boring and lonely. No one praised him for going to bed on time. No one congratulated him for saving money instead of spending it. No one noticed the small decisions he was making differently. Discipline didn't reward him with feelings. It demanded action without offering proof that it mattered. Some nights, Ethan questioned it. Is this really growth? Or am I just forcing myself into a smaller life? Motivation had made him feel powerful. Discipline made him feel invisible. But slowly, something began to shift. Not around him, but inside him. There was a strange calm in doing what he said he would do, even when it felt uncomfortable. A quiet pride that didn't need validation. He started to understand that discipline wasn't a punishment for wanting more. It was respect for his future self. Every morning he got up when he didn't feel like it, he was casting a vote, not for excitement, not for instant change, but for reliability. And reliability, he sensed, carried a weight motivation never could. Motivation had been loud and unreliable. Discipline was quiet and steady. It didn't make him feel special. It made him consistent. And as February continued, Ethan realized something unsettling and powerful at the same time. No one was watching him change. But he was. And for the first time that was enough. Ethan noticed the chaos on a Sunday morning. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It revealed itself in pieces. An overflowing laundry basket in the corner of his room. A desk covered in unopened mail, tangled charging cables, old receipts, and notebooks filled with half-started ideas. His phone buzzed with reminders he no longer read and messages he meant to answer later. Later had become permanent. He stood in the middle of his apartment, coffee cooling in his hand, and felt an unexpected heaviness. The place wasn't dirty, just neglected. Like a life paused mid-decision. Everything seemed to be waiting for him to come back and finish what he had started. The same was true everywhere else. His bank account told a confusing story. Money came in, money went out, but he never really knew where it went. Subscriptions he didn't remember signing up for. Impulse purchases that offered momentary relief and long-term regret. He avoided looking too closely, telling himself he'd deal with it when things settled down. His relationships felt the same way. Conversations left unfinished. Apologies delayed. Promises vaguely remembered. People weren't angry at him, just distant, as if they, too, were tired of waiting. And inside his mind, the clutter was worse. Thoughts overlapped. Worries competed for attention. Ideas arrived with enthusiasm and left unfinished, joining a mental pile of somedays and maybes. He felt busy even when he wasn't doing anything. Tired before the day even began. That's when it hit him. Disorder wasn't neutral. It was draining him. Every misplaced object stole a few seconds. Every forgotten task added low-level anxiety. Every unfinished decision demanded mental energy. Chaos was taxing him quietly, consistently, charging interest on everything he had postponed. No wonder discipline felt so heavy. He was trying to build consistency on a shaky foundation. Ethan sat down at his desk, pushing aside a stack of papers, and exhaled deeply. He realized that he wasn't lacking effort or intelligence. He was surrounded by friction, self-created obstacles that slowed him down before he even started. This wasn't bad luck. This was mismanagement. For the first time, he saw chaos not as a personality trait or a temporary phase, but as a choice he had been making unconsciously every day. And if chaos was a choice, then so was order. That thought unsettled him, because it meant something else too. It meant that the exhaustion he felt wasn't from doing too much. It was from carrying too much that no longer belonged in his life. Ethan didn't plan to change his life that day. He planned to clean his room. It started small. He picked up a jacket from the chair where it had lived for weeks and hung it in the closet. Then another. Then he cleared his desk, stacking papers into piles. Keep, deal with, throw away. The simple act of deciding felt heavier than the physical work. Every object asked a question. Why is this still here? What were you avoiding when you left this unfinished? Old notebooks revealed ideas he once believed in and quietly abandoned. Receipts reminded him of money spent without thought. A drawer full of random items, keys, cables, forgotten tools, felt like a perfect reflection of his mind. Useful things buried under indecision. As the room slowly cleared, something unexpected happened. The noise inside his head grew louder. Cleaning forced him to confront what procrastination had hidden. Unpaid bills weren't just paper. They were delayed responsibility. Clothes he never wore were reminders of versions of himself he imagined but never became. Half-finished projects whispered the same uncomfortable truth. You stop when it gets hard. He paused, sitting on the floor, surrounded by order in progress and discomfort in full view. This wasn't about dust. It was about endings. Throwing things away felt strangely emotional. Letting go required admitting that some choices were mistakes, that some plans had expired, that some excuses had kept him comfortable but stagnant. Order demanded honesty, and honesty didn't negotiate. Still, he kept going. He organized his finances next. Logged into accounts he had avoided. Cancelled subscriptions. Wrote numbers down. It wasn't pleasant, but it was clear. For the first time in years, he knew exactly where he stood, and that knowledge, though sobering, felt grounding. By evening, the room looked different. So did he. The space felt lighter, but more importantly, it felt intentional. There was room to breathe, room to think, room for something new to enter. Ethan realized that decluttering wasn't about creating a perfect environment. It was about removing friction between who he was and who he wanted to become. Cleaning had done something discipline alone couldn't. It had confronted his fears directly. Fear of failure, fear of responsibility, fear of discovering that his life was the result of his own decisions. And yet, instead of crushing him, that realization gave him a strange sense of power. Because for the first time, he wasn't running from the mess. He was standing in the middle of it, choosing what stayed and what went. And that choice, he understood now, was the beginning of control. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, late one night, when Ethan was sitting alone in his newly cleaned room. The desk was clear. The floor was visible. The silence felt different now. Less heavy, more honest. With fewer distractions around him, his thoughts had nowhere to hide. He replayed familiar stories in his mind. If my boss had believed in me, if I had more time, if my past hadn't been so complicated, if the economy were better. Each sentence carried truth. None of them carried power. For years, he had leaned on these explanations like crutches. They softened the pain of stagnation, gave him reasons that didn't require change. And yet, sitting there, Ethan felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest. Those reasons hadn't protected him. They had trapped him. Blame, he realized, was easy. It asked nothing of him except agreement. Responsibility, on the other hand, demanded action, and action came with risk. If everything was his fault, then everything was also his to fix. That thought terrified him, but it also freed him. Ethan stood and looked at himself in the mirror. Not with judgment, not with pity, but with clarity. He saw a man who had waited for permission to grow, who had expected circumstances to shift before he did, who had confused understanding his struggles with surrendering to them. No one was coming. No mentor. No perfect opportunity. No sudden breakthrough. If his life was going to change, it would be because he changed how he responded to what was already in front of him. He took a breath and said it out loud, softly but firmly. This is my responsibility, not the past, not other people's choices, not what he couldn't control. Just this moment, this decision, this direction. Responsibility didn't feel empowering at first. It felt heavy, unforgiving. It removed the comfort of excuses and replaced it with accountability. But beneath that weight was something solid. Ownership. For the first time, Ethan stopped asking what life owed him. He started asking what he could do with what he had. And that shift, subtle, internal, invisible to everyone else, changed the way he stood, the way he thought, the way he moved forward. He wasn't waiting anymore. He had taken the wheel. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was finally clear. If he stayed stuck from this point on, it would be by choice. And so would progress. Nothing remarkable happened after Ethan chose responsibility. No sudden confidence. No instant results. No moment where life applauded his decision. Monday looked exactly like the Monday before it. The alarm rang at 6 a.m. He got up. Not energized. Not inspired. Just obedient to the decision he had already made. He made his bed, not because it transformed his life, but because it was one small thing he said he would do. Then he did another. He worked in focus blocks, even when his mind drifted. He cooked a simple meal instead of ordering takeout. He went for a short walk instead of scrolling endlessly on his phone. None of it felt impressive. In fact, it felt almost disappointingly ordinary. That was the hardest part. Ethan had always believed change would feel big, dramatic, emotional, undeniable. Instead, it felt quiet, repetitive, boring. Days passed, then weeks. There were no visible rewards. His bank account didn't magically grow. His career didn't suddenly accelerate. Some days, it felt like nothing was happening at all. And more than once, he wondered if he was wasting his time. But something subtle began to shift. He noticed that decisions took less effort. Waking up required fewer internal arguments. He trusted himself a little more, not because he felt strong, but because he kept showing up. Each small action became evidence. I said I would do this, and I did. I didn't feel like it, and I still did it. That repetition began rewriting the story he had told himself for years. He was no longer someone who started strong and faded. He was becoming someone who continued. Identity, he realized, wasn't built by grand declarations. It was built by small promises kept consistently. The habits were almost invisible from the outside. But inside, they were stacking up, day after day, like quiet bricks forming a foundation. He began to see himself differently, not as a man chasing change, but as a man practicing reliability. And reliability changed how he acted. He stopped negotiating with himself so much. He stopped waiting for the perfect mood. He didn't need motivation to begin because beginning had become familiar. The actions were still boring, but they were no longer meaningless. Because with every ordinary day completed with intention, Ethan wasn't just changing what he did. He was changing who he believed he was. And that belief, once formed, was far more powerful than any burst of motivation he had ever felt. By March, Ethan's life had become quieter, slower, almost unnoticeable to anyone outside his apartment. But inside, something was stirring. He realized that all the effort, discipline, and small habits were creating a version of himself that could actually do something. Not for recognition, not for applause, not even for immediate reward, but because he was capable. And capability, he learned, meant little if it wasn't applied. For years, he had asked himself the same question every morning. What's in this for me? It had been the lens through which he viewed work, relationships, and even personal growth. But that question had left him empty, chasing benefits that never seemed to appear. One day, as he helped a colleague untangle a complicated report, he noticed the shift. The colleague's relief, the genuine gratitude in their voice, felt different from the hollow praise he had always sought. It didn't matter how small the help was. What mattered was that he had made a positive impact. That evening, he reflected on his past months. He realized that while he had been focused on himself, his discipline, his order, his identity, he had overlooked the simplest truth: abundance didn't come from taking. It came from being useful. So he started small. He volunteered to take on tasks no one wanted at work, completing them meticulously. He stayed a few minutes longer to help a neighbor carry groceries. He mentored a junior colleague who had been struggling silently. Each act was small, often unnoticed, sometimes inconvenient, but he committed fully. Doors began to open. Not the flashy, immediate kind, but subtle, undeniable ones. Invitations to collaborate, opportunities to take on meaningful projects, connections with people who valued reliability and excellence. He realized that when he shifted the focus from "what do I get" to "how can I serve," life responded differently. He understood something crucial. Being useful wasn't about being selfless in the romantic sense. It wasn't about losing himself. It was about contributing value, solving problems, and approaching every interaction with care and integrity. And with every small act of usefulness, Ethan noticed a quiet transformation in himself. He was no longer just the man who woke up to an alarm every day, trapped in routines. He was becoming someone whose presence mattered, someone who could create impact simply by doing what he could, where he was, with what he had. Abundance, he realized, didn't chase him. It followed the person who made themselves necessary. By the time April rolled in, Ethan had begun to notice a strange pattern. The external world didn't seem to reward him instantly, but it did respond to the person he was becoming. It was subtle at first. His colleagues began trusting him with tasks that previously would have been handed to someone more reliable. Friends started seeking his advice because he listened carefully and followed through. Even strangers seemed to respect the quiet steadiness he carried. He paused one evening, sitting at his desk, and reflected on the months behind him. The alarms, the workouts, the meticulous organization of his space, the small acts of service, it all had one common thread. It wasn't the actions themselves that created change. It was who he was becoming in the process. Ethan realized he had been chasing results for years. Promotions, recognition, savings, admiration. All of it felt just out of reach, despite his constant effort. And now he understood why. Results follow identity, not the other way around. Discipline had taught him self-respect, order had given him clarity, and responsibility had removed the crutches of excuses. These qualities weren't tools to temporarily improve his life. They had become part of his very being. He caught himself smiling quietly. The change felt internal, almost invisible, yet profound. No one could hand it to him. No one could see it instantly. But it shaped every decision, every interaction, every habit he practiced. Even when motivation had long since left, his actions now felt natural. He didn't debate whether to do the right thing. He didn't negotiate with his conscience. He simply acted in alignment with who he had decided to become. That evening, Ethan made a simple note in his journal. I am someone who finishes what I start. I am someone reliable. I am someone who contributes. I am someone disciplined. It wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about applause. It was about becoming someone worth trusting, by himself first, and by the world second. And that realization, above all else, created a new kind of confidence. Not loud, not boastful, but quiet, steady, and unshakable. Because when identity comes first, results don't have to chase you, they naturally follow. The year didn't explode with fireworks. No sudden promotions. No viral recognition. No miraculous windfall. Life didn't announce that Ethan had finally arrived. And yet, in the quiet of his apartment one late spring morning, he felt something unmistakable. He had changed. Not because someone had given him a chance. Not because he had felt inspired. Not because the calendar said it was a new year. He had changed because he had shown up. Every day. Because he had faced the messy rooms of his life, the unfinished projects, the cluttered finances, and the weak excuses. Because he had chosen responsibility when it was easier to blame. Because he had repeated small, boring actions when no one was watching. Because he had become useful, reliable, and consistent. The reflection in the mirror was the same face, but the eyes were different. Calm. Focused. Certain. The quiet confidence of someone who had learned that results were not a magic gift, but the inevitable consequence of aligned actions. He walked through his apartment slowly, noticing the spaces he had organized, the notes he had completed, the small tasks he had kept up with day after day. Each corner whispered a story of persistence. Each surface reflected discipline in action. Ethan thought back to the alarm that never changed, the mornings when motivation came and left, the months when discipline felt heavy and invisible. He realized that none of those moments had been wasted. Every small decision, every deliberate act, had built a foundation stronger than fleeting excitement ever could. The city outside continued to hum, indifferent to his transformation. No one cheered. No one noticed. And yet, he didn't mind. Because change, he understood, didn't need witnesses. It needed commitment. He sat at his desk, opened his journal, and wrote, I am reliable. I am consistent. I am aligned. And for the first time in years, he didn't need to add, I hope. The year had finally changed, not because of luck, motivation, or miracles, but because he had become someone worth trusting. By himself first, by the world second. And that was enough. Quiet. Certain. Complete. The alarm would ring tomorrow at 6 a.m., as it always did. And Ethan would rise. Not because he had to, not because he was chasing inspiration, but because he was the person who did what he said he would do. And that, he knew, was how life finally began to respond.